My name is Daniel Cole, and I'll never forget the day my family laughed me out of the lawyer's office. We sat in leather chairs beneath chandeliers, waiting for the will to be read. My niece, Julia, the family's golden child, was handed a velvet box of jewelry worth $18 million. Gasps, applause, and even a toast followed. Then came my turn. The lawyer slid a cracked plastic case across the table. A cassette tape. Dust clung to its corners like shame. My father chuckled. Julia smirked. "Guess Grandpa thought you belonged in the bargain bin," she said. The room erupted. I forced a smile, stuffed the cassette in my pocket, and swallowed my humiliation. But that night when I pressed play, the laughter faded. A voice whispered through the static. A voice that wasn't supposed to be there. That cassette wasn't junk. It was a test. A trap and a key. The air inside the lawyer's office felt heavier than the humid summer outside. Crystal chandeliers hummed above us. Polished oak walls lined with shelves of dusty legal books. Every seat in the room was filled with family. My father in his tailored suit, his Rolex flashing every time he lifted his glass of sparkling water. My siblings leaned back like royalty, smug and expectant. Outside the window, Teslas and BMWs glinted in the parking lot, like trophies lined up for display. I sat near the end of the long mahogany table, the place where the forgotten relatives sit. My palms were damp, my chest tight. Grandpa's will was about to be read. The lawyer, Mr. Henson, cleared his throat and adjusted his glasses. Per the last wishes of Mr. Robert Cole, he began, voice steady but cautious like he knew the storm this would cause. Julia, my niece, perched on her chair like a queen in waiting. She was 22, dressed in a designer dress that probably cost more than my yearly rent. My brother beamed at her with the kind of pride he never once showed me. Henson opened a velvet case, and the light from the chandelier hit the contents like fire. Diamonds, emeralds, sapphires, each piece meticulously cut, each one worth a fortune. The collection of family jewelry, appraised at $18 million, is hereby passed to Julia Cole. The room gasped in awe. Phones came out instantly. Someone whispered, "She's set for life." My brother slapped her back, and my sister dabbed her eyes like she was witnessing history. Julia grinned, slipping on a diamond necklace right there in the office as though she'd just won a crown. And then all eyes shifted to me. The lawyer coughed again, awkwardly this time. He pulled open a drawer and set something small on the table in front of me. A cracked plastic case, an old cassette tape with a faded handwritten label I could barely read. "That's it?" Julia laughed, tossing her hair over her shoulder. My father chuckled, low and cruel. "Seems Robert didn't think much of you, Daniel. Guess some of us inherit mansions and fortunes. Others inherit garbage." Laughter rolled around the table. My siblings joined in, even my cousin, who never missed a chance to kick me while I was down. Heat rushed up my neck, burning my ears. My fists clenched, nails biting into my palms, but I forced a smile. The lawyer cleared his throat again as if to defend himself, but he didn't. He just shuffled his papers and moved on. The jewels were worth millions. My cassette looked like it wouldn't fetch 5 cents at a garage sale. I slipped it into my pocket before Julia could make another joke. My hands trembled. My stomach sank. All those years I thought maybe Grandpa saw me, maybe he believed in me, maybe I wasn't invisible. And now this? A cassette? Dust and laughter? I didn't belong here. Not to them. Not to this family of sharks and showboats. I walked out into the hot parking lot, Teslas gleaming, laughter echoing in my ears. The cassette dug into my pocket, heavier than its size should allow. I clenched it in my fist. I told myself it was worthless, just like they said. Just noise on tape. But deep down, I couldn't let it go. That night I'd find out. But what I didn't know was, the tape wasn't just noise. In the days after the will reading, Julia became a star. Everywhere she went, the jewelry sparkled under camera flashes and phone screens. Family dinners turned into coronations. My father couldn't stop bragging. "My granddaughter has inherited the Cole legacy," he'd say, raising his glass as if Julia herself had built the fortune with her bare hands. My siblings chimed in, clapping her on the back, posting filtered photos on Instagram. Captions read things like "blessed and generational wealth." At Sunday brunch, she wore the diamond necklace with a casual shrug. as though $18 million draped around her neck was just another accessory. My aunt nearly cried when she saw it, whispering, "You deserve this, Julia. Grandpa always said you were special." Then her eyes flicked to me, just for a second. The silence that followed was louder than any words. I became the shadow at every gathering, the one people whispered about when they thought I couldn't hear. Poor Daniel. Still single, still renting. He's almost 40, and what does he have to show for it? They gave him a cassette? I didn't even know those still existed. Each comment stung. Each laugh left a bruise I couldn't show. It wasn't just about the jewelry. It was about history. A lifetime of being the one left out, the one told to step aside while Julia basked in the spotlight. Flashbacks played in my head like cruel reels of film. I was 12 when Grandpa bought Julia a brand new piano for her birthday. I got a second-hand baseball glove with a broken strap. Everyone clapped as she played her first tune. No one noticed when my glove tore apart after one season. At 16, Julia got a brand new silver Audi for passing her driving test. My father tossed me the keys to his rusty pickup, muttering, "Don't crash it." Julia posed with her Audi for hours, while I spent mine under the hood of the truck, trying to keep it alive long enough to get me to school. And when I graduated from college, quietly, with no fanfare, Julia's high school graduation had a banquet hall, a string quartet, and balloons spelling out her name. I told myself it didn't matter, that I'd carve my own path, even if no one believed in me. But sitting there now, watching Julia sparkle under chandeliers, my anger simmered. Every time she laughed, every time someone compared us, it wasn't just jealousy. It was the weight of years pressing on my chest. One evening, I overheard my brother talking on the phone, his voice dripping with pride. "Julia's the true heir. Daniel, he's Daniel. He'll never amount to much." My hands shook so badly I nearly dropped the glass I was holding. The cassette in my pocket felt like a curse, a final insult from a man I once trusted. But as I sat in my apartment that night, staring at the old tape on my desk, a strange thought crept in. What if it wasn't a joke? What if Grandpa had left it for a reason? The laughter of my family echoed in my memory, pushing me toward the tape player. I wasn't ready for what it would reveal. But what I didn't know was, envy hides more than it shows. The night I pressed play, the world felt unnaturally still. My apartment was quiet, except for the hum of the old refrigerator and the buzz of the street lamp outside. I sat at my desk, the cassette in my hands, its cracked plastic case reflecting the glow of the desk lamp. My chest tightened as though the room itself was holding its breath with me. For hours after the will reading, I tried to ignore it, stuffing the tape into a drawer, telling myself it was worthless. But humiliation doesn't fade that easily. It festers, and somewhere between midnight and 1 in the morning, my curiosity overpowered my shame. I slid the cassette into the player. The machine whirred, gears clicking like old bones creaking. Then came the hiss of static, the kind that makes your skin prickle. I leaned in, expecting noise, expecting nothing. But then a voice crackled through. A voice I knew. "Daniel." My stomach dropped. It was Julia. "If you're hearing this," her voice trembled, "something's wrong. I can't." The recording cut off abruptly, the hiss of static swallowing her words. I froze, my heart slamming against my ribs. Julia, my niece, the golden child with her 18 million in jewels? Why would she be on this tape? Why would Grandpa leave it to me? I hit rewind, fingers shaking, and played it again. "If you're hearing this, something's wrong. I can't." The same abrupt silence. The same static. I replayed it a dozen times, hoping the machine would reveal more, hoping there was some trick of sound I'd missed. But every time it ended in that chilling void. I leaned back in my chair, rubbing my temples. My niece's voice had cracked on that word. Wrong. Not rehearsed, not smug. She sounded scared, vulnerable in a way I had never heard her before. Questions clawed at me. Why record this? What did she mean by something's wrong? And why did Grandpa leave it to me? Me, of all people. I couldn't shake the unease. It wasn't just a tape anymore. It was a message, a plea. The hours stretched past 2 a.m. The city outside was asleep, but I sat there in the dim light, replaying her voice until the words etched themselves into my skull. Each time the cutoff grew sharper, more sinister. I thought about calling her, about demanding an explanation. But what would I even say? "Hey, Julia, I've got this tape where you sound like you're about to confess to murder." No, not yet. I needed to think. I needed to figure out what this meant. Still, one thing was clear. The cassette wasn't worthless. It wasn't trash. It was the beginning of something. Something Grandpa had hidden. Something Julia had recorded in secret. I stared at the tape, the faint handwriting on the label, smudged but deliberate. I traced my finger over it, wondering how many secrets were locked inside. And then a thought hit me so hard I nearly dropped the player. What if Julia wasn't the only voice on it? But what I didn't know was, she wasn't the only one who recorded something. The hiss of static lingered in my ears long after I stopped the cassette. Julia's frightened voice echoed in my skull like a ghost. I couldn't sleep. I just sat in the dark, staring at the ceiling, drowning in memories I thought I'd buried. Because hearing her vulnerability reminded me of something I knew all too well. What it meant to live under the shadow of a man who measured worth in dollar signs. My father. From the time I was a boy, he made one thing clear. Money was the only proof of value. He built his empire flipping real estate, driving German cars, and flashing Rolexes that glinted like small suns at every dinner table. He wore success like armor and demanded his children do the same. But me, I was disappointed. I loved books. I stayed up late reading instead of shadowing him at business dinners. While my siblings learned to calculate property returns, I filled journals with stories, sketches, and questions he dismissed as nonsense. "Daniel," he'd say with a sneer, "dreamers don't pay mortgages. Weak men hide in books. Strong men build empires." When I worked part-time jobs in high school, stocking shelves, bussing tables, he mocked me openly. "Is this your empire? Serving coffee?" He'd laugh loud enough for the whole family to hear. The words dug trenches in me. By the time I was 20, I already believed I wasn't enough. And the worst part, I carried that belief into adulthood. Every rejection, every failure, every quiet humiliation seemed to confirm the prophecy he'd carved into me, that I was invisible, that my name carried no weight. Now, sitting in the glow of a single desk lamp, the cassette on the table, I realized why it rattled me so deeply. Julia's voice, scared, uncertain, felt like a reflection of all the shame I'd lived under. It wasn't just a recording. It was a mirror. I rubbed my temples, anger simmering in my chest. How had I let him control my story for so long? Even in death, Grandpa's will had been read through my father's lens of humiliation. Jewelry for the golden child, a cassette for the failure. But the tape was different. It didn't fit the narrative my father had forced down my throat. Julia's voice, fragile and broken, hinted at cracks in the perfect world my father worshipped. Cracks he couldn't polish away with champagne and power suits. As I sat there, memories bled into the present. I saw myself at 13, holding up a short story I'd written for class, hoping for a nod of approval. He barely glanced at it before muttering, "Get your head out of the clouds. You'll never make money with scribbles." I saw myself at 25, standing in front of him after losing a job, his voice sharp as glass. "Pathetic. A man your age, failing. You'll never be more than a leech." And now, at 38, I still felt the sting. Still felt his voice shaping the way the world saw me. But the cassette, that unexpected inheritance, wasn't just noise. It was a crack in the mask. It was proof that the story wasn't finished. I turned it over in my hand, staring at the faded label again. And as the gears in my mind turned, I realized something chilling. Julia's voice was only the beginning. There was more recorded on that tape, and I wasn't ready for who I'd hear next. But what I didn't know was, my father's secrets were also on the tape. The gala was everything my family worshipped. Crystal chandeliers dripping with light, velvet carpets thick enough to swallow your shoes, and champagne served in glasses so thin they sang when tapped. Reporters and photographers clustered near the entrance, ready to immortalize the night in glossy magazines and society pages. And at the center of it all, like royalty basking on her throne, was Julia. She wore the emerald necklace from Grandpa's collection. Its green fire caught every flash, every wandering eye. Diamonds glimmered from her ears, her wrists. The jewelry appraiser had placed the value at $18 million, and she wore it like a queen wears a crown, heavy but intoxicating. The crowd circled her, voices dripping with admiration. "She's the true heir." Robert always adored her. 18 million. Can you imagine? I stood near the back, nursing a glass of water, feeling smaller with every cheer, every laugh. The tux I'd rented looked cheap under the ballroom lights. I was the ghost in the room, present but unseen, except for when someone whispered just loud enough to sting. "That's Daniel, right? The one who got, what was it? A cassette tape?" A burst of laughter followed. Shame burned through me again, hot and relentless. I tried to hold my head high, but my body betrayed me. Shoulders hunched, eyes down. I didn't belong here. I told myself to leave, to slip out into the night before humiliation found me again. But then something strange cut through the noise. As Julia leaned in close to her best friend, a tall brunette in a sequined gown, I caught her words. Her smile never faltered, but her voice cracked, just enough to betray nerves. "I just hope no one ever finds out," she whispered. Her friend tilted her head, confused. "Find out what?" Julia's hand shot to the necklace, clutching it like it might choke her. "About what's really hidden." I can't explain now." The brunette frowned, but the conversation broke as another photographer demanded Julia's attention. She plastered her perfect smile back on, lifting her chin high as if nothing had happened. But I had heard it. My humiliation turned to curiosity, then suspicion. What was she hiding? What could be wrong with $18 million worth of jewels? The thought gnawed at me as I slipped outside for air. The night was cool, the city skyline sharp against the dark. I replayed her words in my head over and over. "I just hope no one ever finds out." I gripped the railing until my knuckles whitened. Julia had everything. The fortune, the family's praise, the spotlight. And yet, she was afraid. That fear was bigger than the jewelry, bigger than the fortune. I thought back to the tape, to her voice trembling in the dark. "If you're hearing this, something's wrong." The two pieces clicked in my mind like gears grinding into place. The jewelry wasn't the treasure. It was a cover, a mask, and Grandpa had known it. That's why the tape came to me, not her. My humiliation twisted into something new. Resolve. But what I didn't know was, the jewelry itself wasn't the treasure. I don't know what made me do it. Maybe instinct, maybe desperation. But that night, after the gala, I flipped the cassette over. The gears inside the old player whined like a tired engine as side B clicked into place. A soft hiss filled the room, followed by a pause so long I thought the tape might be blank. Then a voice rose through the static. Not Julia's, Grandpa's. "Daniel," he said, frail but steady, as though speaking across time. My breath caught. I hadn't heard his voice since the funeral, and even then, grief had muffled it. Now it was just me and me, alone in the dark. "If you're listening," he went on, "then the family has already taken what they believe is their prize. But it was never theirs to claim. You are the one I trust." I froze. The one he trusted? My chest tightened. All those years of humiliation, of being dismissed as a failure, Grandpa hadn't seen me that way. He had chosen me. His voice cracked slightly as if the tape had captured not just sound but struggle. "What they see as treasure is distraction. The true inheritance lies deeper, hidden where only music can lead you." And then, it started. A jazz melody played in the background, faint but deliberate. A piano, slow and careful, each note lingering like a footprint in sand. At first, it seemed like filler, something he'd recorded absent-mindedly. But the longer I listened, the more deliberate it sounded. Because the melody wasn't random. It was patterned. The piano notes rose and fell in a way that mimicked numbers. I scribbled on a notepad, marking down the rises and dips, the pauses between chords. It wasn't just music, it was code. "Follow the music," Grandpa had said. I rewound the tape, played it again. Each time I caught something new, a pause that marked a break, a chord that repeated like an arrow pointing forward. My heart raced. The jazz wasn't just background, it was a map. But a map to what? The tape hissed on. Grandpa's voice returned, softer now, as though he'd leaned close to the microphone. "Daniel, there are things your father doesn't want you to know. Things I left behind, locked away. If you can find it, you will understand everything, who you are, and why I chose you." I gripped the edge of the desk, knuckles white. For years I thought I was nothing. For years I believed the cruel words of a man who measured me against wealth I could never match. But here, in this fragile recording, Grandpa was handing me a different truth. It wasn't Julia, it wasn't the jewelry, it was me. The tape ended with the soft scrape of a chair, a shuffle of breath, and then silence. I sat in the glow of the lamp, notebook covered in scribbles, the melody still ringing in my ears. It wasn't just a message. It was a puzzle, a trail Grandpa had left only for me. I leaned back, heart pounding, and whispered into the empty room, "What were you hiding, Grandpa?" But what I didn't know was, the map was in the music. Sunday dinners at my father's house always felt like court sessions. He sat at the head of the long mahogany table, a judge with his glass of bourbon, while the rest of us played our roles, jurors, defendants, sometimes executioners. The chandelier cast golden light on polished silverware, roasted lamb, and crystal glasses filled with wine I couldn't pronounce. That evening, Julia arrived late, dripping in diamonds. She didn't apologize. She didn't need to. The second she walked in, every eye followed her as though she were royalty. Her necklace glittered like a spotlight, making me fade further into the shadows. I clenched my jaw, waiting. My father toasted her accomplishments again, his Rolex catching the light with every gesture. "To Julia," he declared, "the true heir of this family's name." The clinking of glasses echoed like a hammer striking the final nail in my coffin. Something inside me snapped. I pushed my chair back, the scrape cutting through the hum of conversation. My voice was steady, but my heart pounded so hard it shook my chest. Grandpa left me something, too. The room stilled. Dozens of eyes turned my way. My father's smirk spread slowly, the way a snake coils before striking. "Oh yes," he said, voice dripping with contempt. "The legendary cassette tape. Tell us, Daniel, did it play you a lullaby?" Laughter rippled around the table. Julia covered her mouth like she was trying to stifle a laugh, but her eyes sparkled with cruelty. "Maybe it's worth a fortune," she teased. "Collectors pay big for trash these days." Heat burned in my face. It wasn't trash. Grandpa trusted me with it, and it means something. My sister snorted into her wine glass. My brother leaned back, shaking his head. "Face it, Daniel. You were always Grandpa's charity case. He gave you a cassette so you wouldn't cry about being left out." The mocking grew louder. Forks clinked against plates, shoulders shook with laughter, whispers cut sharper than knives. My father leaned forward, eyes like steel. "You're chasing ghosts," he hissed. "Robert left you nothing because you are nothing. Accept it before you embarrass yourself further." His words sliced through me, sharp and familiar. I felt 13 again, holding up a story he'd dismissed. 25 again, begging for approval he'd never give. 38, humiliated at a will reading. But this time, I didn't shrink. "This isn't about you," I said, my voice louder than I'd intended. "Grandpa trusted me, not you, and I'll prove it." Chairs scraped. Someone muttered, "Here we go again." My father's lips twisted into a grin that didn't reach his eyes. "Prove it," he mocked. "You couldn't prove your worth if your life depended on it." That was the final straw. I shoved my chair back and stormed out. The laughter followed me down the hallway, echoing against the walls like a curse. By the time I stepped outside, the cool night air hit my face, sharp and merciless. My fists ached from clenching. My chest heaved. But as the door shut behind me, cutting off the cruel chorus, something shifted. For the first time, I didn't feel crushed by their words. I felt fueled. And I wasn't alone, because when I reached my car, parked at the edge of the long gravel driveway, a shadow moved. A figure stepped forward. "Daniel," a voice said softly. "I believe you." But what I didn't know was, someone else believed me. The figure stepped into the glow of the porch light and my chest tightened. It was Maddie. My cousin, 2 years younger than me, with the same sharp coal eyes but none of the cruelty that seemed baked into the rest of the family. She'd always been quiet, the type to linger at the edges of gatherings, sketching in notebooks instead of clawing for attention. "Maddie?" I asked, still catching my breath from the storm I'd just left inside. She looked around nervously before speaking, her voice low. "I heard what you said in there. About Grandpa leaving you something. I think you're right." The words hit harder than I expected. After years of being dismissed, mocked, and ignored, someone finally believed me. But disbelief crept in just as quickly. "Why would you say that?" I asked cautiously. She bit her lip, stepping closer. "Because I overheard Julia at the gala." My mind snapped back to the hushed words I'd caught, Julia clutching her necklace as she whispered to her friend. "I just hope no one ever finds out." Maddie's eyes flicked toward the house, then back to me. She wasn't just bragging about the jewelry. I heard her say she had to cover something up. And she hesitated, as though saying it aloud might curse her. I saw her sneaking into Grandpa's study the night before he died. The words chilled me. "What?" I whispered. She was rifling through his drawers. She looked scared, desperate. When she saw me, she pretended she was just looking for a photo album. "But—" Maddie shook her head. She was hiding something. Pieces of the puzzle began grinding in my head. Julia's voice on the tape. Her nervous whisper at the gala. Now this. I rubbed my forehead, trying to think. "Why are you telling me this?" "You know what the family thinks of me." "Because I don't care what they think," she said, her voice firm now. "I know you, and I know Grandpa. He trusted you more than anyone. I could see it. And if he left you that cassette, it's for a reason." Her certainty steadied me. For the first time in years, I felt like maybe I wasn't insane for believing the tape meant something. Maddie leaned closer. "If you're going to figure this out, you can't do it alone. I want to help." I studied her face in the half-light. She looked nothing like the polished Cole heirs who paraded their wealth. No diamonds, no designer dress, just simple clothes and the kind of raw honesty you couldn't fake. For a moment, I let myself believe. "Okay," I said finally. "Then we start with the tape. There's something on it. A code hidden in the music." Her eyes widened, but she didn't laugh. She nodded. "Then we'll crack it." A surge of relief washed through me. After years of being the family embarrassment, I finally had someone in my corner, someone who didn't see me as a failure. But as we walked to my car, I couldn't shake the unease crawling up my spine. Because in families like mine, alliances are dangerous, and secrets never travel alone. But what I didn't know was, betrayal runs in pairs. 2 days later, I got a call I wasn't expecting. "Mr. Cole," the voice on the other end said, clipped and professional. "This is Attorney Ellis. I'd like you to come by my office, privately." His tone carried no warmth. Still, curiosity outweighed suspicion. If Grandpa's lawyer wanted to talk, I had to hear him out. Ellis's office was in one of those downtown towers with mirrored glass that reflects the city skyline. Inside, everything was polished marble, leather chairs, and silence that smelled of money. He greeted me stiffly, his handshake limp, his eyes sharp. "Daniel," he said, motioning me to sit. "I'll get straight to the point. You stirred the hornet's nest with your claims." I sat down, forcing myself to keep my voice calm. "I'm not making claims. I have proof. A recording." His brow twitched, almost like a suppressed smile. "Proof is a dangerous word, Mr. Cole. Unless it's admissible, it's just noise." The word noise hit me like a slap. The same word my father had sneered. The same word Julia had implied. Ellis leaned back, crossing his legs. "You should understand how fragile these matters are. If there is evidence of fraud, yes, the entire inheritance could shift. Assets could be frozen, distributed differently, but—" He paused, studying me like I was a bug under glass. "You'd be painting a target on your back. These people don't forgive easily." My stomach tightened. "These people? You mean my family?" He gave the smallest shrug. "You said it, not me." I stared at him, trying to read his expression. He was too polished, too controlled. Not a crack to be found. "I just want the truth," I said. His lips curled into something colder than a smile. "Truth is relative, Mr. Cole. Julia has already proven herself as the rightful heir. 18 million in jewelry, perfectly appraised, perfectly legal. Challenging that." He leaned forward, voice lowering. would be unwise. There it was, the warning, wrapped in legal jargon but heavy with threat. "So you're on her side," I said, the words sharper than I intended. Ellis didn't flinch. "I'm on the side of stability, and stability lies with Julia." The silence stretched. My pulse hammered. I felt like a trespasser in a courtroom where the verdict had already been decided. Finally, he stood, signaling the meeting was over. "My advice, Daniel? Forget the tape. Forget your grandfather's riddles. Take what you've been given, however small it may seem, and walk away. Otherwise, you may find yourself with less than nothing." I left his office with my fists clenched so tight my nails cut into my palms. The city air outside felt colder than the marble walls inside. Ellis had made one thing clear. If I kept pushing, I'd be alone. And Julia had him in her pocket. But as I walked to my car, one thought echoed louder than his warnings. If he was so eager for me to drop it, then the tape must mean more than even I realized. But what I didn't know was Ellis wasn't on my side. I spent the next night hunched over my desk, the cassette player clicking and hissing, the same jazz melody looping until the notes burrowed into my skull. Maddie sat across from me, chewing the end of a pencil, her notebook already filled with scribbles and symbols. Grandpa's voice replayed in my head, "Follow the music." At first, it sounded like nothing more than piano chords layered over a saxophone, standard, smoky jazz. But the longer I listened, the more the rhythm shifted. There was a deliberate pattern, a sequence of pauses and repeats that didn't belong in casual improvisation. "Do you hear it?" I asked, leaning forward. Maddie nodded, tapping her pencil on the page. "It's not music. It's code." She circled clusters of notes, jotting down numbers. Every long pause became a divider. Every repeated chord corresponded to a digit. Slowly, painfully, a string of numbers emerged from the music. 3-7, she whispered, then 4-1, then 9-5. I leaned over her shoulder, adrenaline tightening my chest. "Coordinates." She looked up at me, eyes wide. "You think?" "Yes." I grabbed my phone, punching the numbers into a map app. The screen shifted, zooming in on a rural patch of land 2 hours outside the city. My throat went dry as I read the location aloud. The farmhouse. Grandpa's old property. The one he'd abandoned years ago after Grandma died. I remembered visiting as a kid. Wide fields, a weathered barn, a place that smelled of soil and hay. Everyone said it was worthless land, a relic of a bygone era. But the coordinates pointed directly to it. We sat in stunned silence, the glow of the phone screen casting shadows across the room. "So that's it," Maddie said. "The jewels, the will, all of it. They're distractions. The real inheritance is there." I swallowed hard, staring at the phone. And Grandpa wanted me to find it. The thought was overwhelming. For years, I'd been the family embarrassment, the man with nothing to his name. But what if everything they mocked me for, every sneer, every laugh, had blinded them from the truth? My heart pounded as the tape clicked to a stop. The silence that followed was deafening, heavy with revelation. Maddie leaned closer. "We have to go there." Her certainty steadied me. For the first time in decades, I wasn't doubting myself. The humiliation I'd carried for so long now burned into fuel. I rewound the tape once more, pressing play just to hear Grandpa's frail but steady voice. "Daniel, you are the one I trust." I whispered back as if he could still hear me. "I won't let you down." The farmhouse called to me now, not as an empty relic, but as a vault of secrets, a final test, a hidden truth that had been buried beneath layers of greed and lies. I turned off the cassette player, grabbed my notebook, and stood. Maddie's eyes followed me. "You ready?" she asked. I nodded. More than ready. Because the music had spoken, and I finally had a map. But what I didn't know was the trail led to a vault. The farmhouse coordinates weighed heavily on my mind, but something about the cassette still gnawed at me. Grandpa had been meticulous, deliberate. If the music was a code, then maybe the cassette itself, its very shell, was part of the puzzle. It was close to midnight when the thought struck me. I grabbed a small screwdriver from the kitchen drawer and set the cassette on the desk under the lamplight. Maddie raised an eyebrow as she watched me pry at the casing. "You're taking it apart?" "Grandpa didn't waste space," I muttered. "If he hid a message in music, why wouldn't he hide something else in here?" The screws gave way with a faint click. I lifted the plastic cover carefully, the spools and tape gleaming like old veins under the light. And then I saw it. Tucked beneath the left spool, held in place by a strip of yellowed masking tape, was something metallic. My pulse spiked. I peeled it free. A small, flat brass key glinted in my palm. Not just any key. It was engraved with a number. 1473, Maddie read aloud, leaning closer. Her voice dropped. That's a deposit box number. The air in the room seemed to shift. A safety deposit box. Grandpa hadn't just left me clues, he'd left me access. I stared at the key, the weight of it pressing into my hand like destiny itself. For years, my father and siblings flaunted their wealth as proof of worth. And now, here was something they couldn't buy, a secret entrusted only to me. My mind raced with possibilities. Cash, more jewelry, documents that could unravel every smug lie my father had ever told. "We have to find out what's inside," Maddie whispered, her eyes wide with urgency. I nodded, already imagining the cold steel of a bank vault, the smell of old paper and secrets long buried. Whatever Grandpa had hidden there, it was meant for me. For us to uncover. I set the cassette shell aside, clutching the key in my fist. The brass was warm now, as though carrying the heat of every moment I'd waited for this kind of validation. But even as triumph coursed through me, a sliver of unease crept in. Grandpa had hidden this for a reason. Julia's nervous whispers, Alice's cold warning, they weren't coincidences. Everyone was circling the inheritance like vultures. If I had the key, then I had leverage. And leverage is dangerous. Maddie broke the silence. "When do we go?" "As soon as possible," I said. My voice was steady, but inside my chest adrenaline surged like a storm. For the first time in my life, I wasn't chasing scraps. I wasn't standing in the shadows of Tesla owners and Rolex flashers. I was holding something that could change everything. I slipped the key into my pocket, the metal cool against my skin. But when I glanced at the window, the blinds shifted. Just slightly, a chill ran through me. Because in that moment I realized something I hadn't allowed myself to consider. I wasn't alone, but what I didn't know was someone followed me there. The next morning, Maddie and I drove in silence to the bank. The key in my pocket felt like a live wire buzzing with every bump in the road. I couldn't stop picturing it, rows of gleaming steel boxes, one of them holding the truth my grandfather wanted me to find. The bank itself was pristine, marble floors gleaming under fluorescent lights, the air sharp with the faint smell of polish and ink. A clerk in a navy suit guided us through the process with polite indifference. When I slid the brass key across the counter, his brows lifted slightly, then he nodded. "This way, Mr. Cole." The vault was a fortress, thick doors, walls of reinforced steel, the kind of place that felt like it could outlast the apocalypse. My pulse quickened as the clerk led us down a narrow aisle, stopping at box number 1473. "This one," he said. I slipped the key into the lock. The mechanism clicked, smooth and final, like destiny unlocking itself. My hands trembled as I pulled the box free and set it on the small table in the viewing room. Maddie leaned forward, her breath caught. "Go on," she whispered. I opened it and froze. It was empty. No documents, no jewelry, no stacks of cash. Just a single folded piece of paper sitting at the bottom like a cruel joke. My stomach twisted as I reached for it, dread curling through my veins. The note was short, written in a hurried scrawl. "Trust no one." The words punched the air out of me. My throat went dry, my vision tunneling. I knew that handwriting. It wasn't Grandpa's. It was Julia's. My chest burned as the truth slammed into me. She had been here. She had opened this box before me. She had taken whatever was meant to be inside and left only this warning, or this taunt. Maddie's eyes darted between me and the note. "Daniel, is that?" "Yes," I said, my voice tight, the paper trembling in my grip. "It's hers." The weight of betrayal pressed harder than ever. Julia, the golden child with her $18 million crown, had gotten here first. She knew more than she'd let on. And now she was taunting me with the one phrase guaranteed to unravel me. Trust no one. The words circled in my head like vultures. Did she mean I couldn't trust the family? The lawyer? Maddie? Or was it a smokescreen meant to drive me into paranoia until I destroyed myself? I slammed the box shut, the metallic clang echoing through the small room. Maddie flinched, her face pale. "They'll think I broke in," I muttered. "That I stole whatever was here." "We can prove it," Maddie said quickly, though her voice quivered. "There are cameras. There has to be a record of who accessed the box before you." Her logic steadied me for a second, but the pit in my stomach only grew deeper. Because I realized something chilling. Julia hadn't left that note for the bank to discover. She had left it for me. She wanted me to know she was 2 steps ahead. And she wanted me to feel alone. I crumpled the paper in my fist, my pulse racing. But what I didn't know was, the note was written by my niece. The night after the bank vault disappointment, I couldn't shake the note from my mind. Trust no one. The words gnawed at me, keeping me awake, replaying over and over like the hiss of the cassette's static. Maddie had stayed close since the trip, insisting she believed me, that she wanted to help decode the rest of the tape. Her voice was calm, her concern convincing. But something about her sudden loyalty started to itch at me like a rash I couldn't scratch. That itch turned into confirmation around midnight. I had stepped outside my apartment to clear my head when I spotted her across the street, illuminated faintly under a flickering street lamp. She wasn't alone. Julia was with her. They spoke in hurried whispers. Julia's hand clutched Maddie's arm tight, her face sharp with anger, her emerald necklace flashing under the light like a warning. Maddie looked nervous, nodding, but she didn't pull away. My chest tightened. The air seemed to drain from the night. I backed into the shadows, my heartbeat thundering in my ears. Maddie, my ally, the one who said she believed me, was feeding Julia information. Minutes later, the trap was sprung. As I returned upstairs, the lights in the hallway flickered. Shadows shifted. Then 3 figures emerged from the stairwell. 2 of Julia's friends, broad-shouldered, smug, and ready. And behind them, Julia herself, her smile razor-sharp. "Well, well," she said, stepping forward. "Looks like the family embarrassment has been busy." I froze. Maddie wasn't with them now, but I didn't need her standing there to feel the knife she'd planted in my back. "You went to the bank, didn't you?" Julia's voice was ice. "Looking for something that doesn't belong to you." One of the men stepped closer, blocking the exit. Another reached for my shoulder, but I twisted away, my instincts screaming. My apartment door was only steps behind me. I lunged, fumbling for the keys, and shoved myself inside. The door slammed shut just as fists pounded against it. "Give it up, Daniel." Julia's voice cut through the woods. "You'll never win this. Grandpa chose me. He always chose me," but her words rang hollow now. They were the words of someone afraid I had something she didn't. I bolted the lock and stumbled into the living room, my chest heaving. The cassette sat on the table where I'd left it, a fragile piece of plastic that now felt like the only lifeline I had. I grabbed it, clutching it to my chest. I didn't know how much Julia knew or what Maddie had told her, but one thing was clear. This tape was the only reason they hadn't crushed me completely. The pounding on the door grew louder, but I didn't wait to find out how long the lock would hold. I grabbed my bag, stuffed the cassette inside, and slipped out the back fire escape into the night. The cool air burned my lungs as I ran, footsteps echoing against the alley walls. Betrayal stung like fire in my veins, but it sharpened me too. If Maddie had sold me out, then the game was deeper than I realized. Trust no one. Grandpa's words, or Julia's warning, had never felt truer. And as I disappeared into the dark, clutching the cassette like it was my heartbeat, I knew one thing for certain. This betrayal wasn't the end. It was only the beginning. But what I didn't know was, the betrayal exposed a deeper truth. The farmhouse was exactly as I remembered it, silent, weathered, and sagging under the weight of time. The wooden steps creaked as I climbed them, dust swirling with every movement. The smell of cedar and mildew clung to the air, as if the house itself had been holding its breath all these years. Maddie's betrayal still burned in my chest, but it also sharpened my resolve. If Grandpa had gone to the trouble of embedding coordinates in music and hiding keys inside cassette shells, then the farmhouse was more than a relic. It was a vault of its own. The attic stairs groaned as I pulled them down. A cloud of dust cascaded, stinging my throat. I climbed into the cramped space, flashlight in hand. Cobwebs stretched across beams like fragile nets, and trunks lined the corners, each one coated in decades of dust. I opened the first trunk, just quilts and moth-eaten clothes. The second, old photo albums yellowed and curling. The third, papers, receipts, and letters from decades ago. Nothing. But in the far corner, under a warped floorboard, something caught my light. A thin, leather-bound ledger, cracked along the spine, its pages swollen from years of hiding. My heart lurched as I pulled it free. The cover was embossed with faint initials. R.C. Robert Cole. Grandpa. My hands shook as I flipped it open. At first, it looked like numbers, endless strings of transactions. Offshore accounts, transfers. Names of banks are scattered across Switzerland, the Caymans, and Singapore. The handwriting was neat, deliberate. And then the totals hit me. 25 million account balances lined up on the page like soldiers. Millions here, millions there. Grandpa hadn't just been a savvy investor. He'd built a hidden empire, tucked far away from the greedy eyes of my father and Julia. I sank to my knees, the ledger trembling in my hands. Proof. This was proof of everything. Proof that the family jewels weren't the real inheritance. Proof that Grandpa had left something larger. Proof that he'd trusted me to find it. For years I'd been told I was worthless, that I was the embarrassment of the Coles. Yet here I was, holding a ledger that could burn their empire to the ground and rebuild it under my name. My chest heaved as I flipped page after page, tracing each entry, the weight of numbers pressing against me like destiny. But then, something strange. The last page didn't list numbers. Instead, there was a note in Grandpa's hand. Daniel, if you've made it this far, you know the truth. But the ledger is not the end. There is another record, one they will fear. One they will try to destroy. Protect it at all costs. My throat went dry. The ledger wasn't the final word. It was just the beginning. I closed the book, clutching it tight to my chest. Dust and silence wrapped around me, but inside a storm raged. I had uncovered hidden millions. I had proof that Grandpa's trust wasn't misplaced. But if this wasn't the end, then the real treasure, the real inheritance, was still out there. And Julia, Maddie, Ellis, they'd do anything to stop me from finding it. But what I didn't know was, the ledger wasn't the final record. The dining room shimmered with crystal glasses and polished silver, but beneath the surface the air was electric with tension. My father sat at the head of the table, puffed up like a king on his throne. Julia sat beside him, her diamond necklace catching the chandelier light, as if mocking me with every glitter. My siblings whispered, laughing in hushed tones. I sat near the end, clutching the cassette player hidden in my lap. My pulse hammered so loud it drowned out the sound of forks on porcelain. Tonight, the charade ended. Halfway through dinner, I rose from my seat. The chatter quieted, eyes turned to me, some annoyed, some amused. I set the small black cassette player on the tablecloth and pressed play. The hiss of static filled the room, followed by the unmistakable voice of Julia. "If you're hearing this, something's wrong." The words echoed, slicing through the clinking glasses and pretentious laughter. Gasps rippled across the table. Chairs scraped as relatives leaned forward. Julia's face drained of color, her fork slipping from her hand. It clattered onto her plate, breaking the silence like a gunshot. "No, turn it off!" Julia barked, her voice cracking. She reached forward, but I held the player tight. My father's face hardened, a storm brewing in his eyes. "What is this nonsense?" he demanded, his voice booming. "This," I said, raising the player, "is proof. Proof that Grandpa left me more than a worthless cassette. Proof that Julia knew something was hidden all along." The room erupted. Aunts whispered. Cousins exchanged stunned looks. Someone muttered, "Why would Julia record that?" Julia's hands shook as she tried to compose herself. "He's lying. That tape, it's fake." He spliced it together, but the tremor in her voice betrayed her. My father slammed his palm against the table, rattling the silverware. "Enough of this. You always were desperate for attention, Daniel. Now you stoop to this? Trying to steal from your niece? I met his glare, my spine straightening with the strength I didn't know I had. No, for once I'm standing up. I have Grandpa's ledger, offshore accounts, proof of everything he kept hidden. He didn't trust you. He didn't trust Julia. He trusted me. The room fell silent again, the words hanging heavy in the air. Julia's face twisted, caught between rage and fear. He's bluffing. There's nothing. He's pathetic. But her trembling hands betrayed her once more. For the first time, the family wasn't laughing at me. They were watching her, watching my father, seeing cracks form in the golden facade they'd built for years. I pressed play again. The static hissed. Then Grandpa's frail but steady voice spoke through the speakers. "Daniel, if you're listening, you are the one I trust. Follow the music." The words were undeniable. Grandpa's voice, his authority, his choice. Murmurs broke out like wildfire. It's his voice. It's really him. Julia clutched at her necklace, her face pale as chalk. My father's jaw clenched so tight I thought his teeth might crack. "You don't know what you're dealing with," Julia whispered almost to herself. I leaned forward, my eyes locked on hers. "Then maybe you should tell us what you're so afraid of." She froze. Her lips parted, but no words came. The room was on edge, every cousin, uncle, and aunt leaning in, waiting for the next revelation. For once, the balance of power was shifting. I could feel it. But what I didn't know was, the jewelry was already fake. The morning after the showdown, the house buzzed like a hornet's nest. Whispers traveled faster than the coffee brewing in the kitchen. Julia stayed locked in her room, curtains drawn, but the rest of the family swirled with suspicion. By noon, the experts arrived, 2 men in tailored suits carrying black leather cases. They weren't just jewelers. They were appraisers from one of the most prestigious firms in Manhattan. My father strutted in behind them, trying to reclaim control. "You'll see," he told the room. "These pieces are priceless, and Julia deserves every one of them." Julia appeared finally, pale but composed, the diamond necklace glittering against her collarbone, earrings flashing under the chandelier. She perched like royalty in the center of the room, while the experts unpacked their magnifying lenses and digital scales. One by one, they lifted the pieces from velvet trays. Necklaces, bracelets, and rings that supposedly totaled $18 million. The air grew tense as magnifiers clicked into place and small lights flickered on. The jewelers bent low, their brows furrowing. 10 minutes passed, then 20. Finally, one of them straightened, removing his glasses slowly. "This," he said, holding up the necklace, "is glass." The room erupted in chaos. "Glass?" An uncle shouted, nearly knocking over his chair. The second expert nodded grimly, flipping the bracelet under the light. "Every piece in this collection is a replica. High quality, but worthless compared to the originals." Julia's face drained of all color. "That's impossible," she stammered. They were appraised before. Grandpa himself. But the experts shook their heads. If they were genuine before, they were swapped. "These pieces have no value beyond costume jewelry." Aunt Marjorie clutched her pearls, ironically, the only real gems in the room. Murmurs filled the air. 18 million. Gone. Switched? By who? When? My father slammed a fist against the table. "This is sabotage. Someone tampered with them." His eyes turned sharp, locking on me. "Daniel, this reeks of your jealousy." I laughed bitterly, shaking my head. "Funny, the one thing I didn't have my hands on was the jewelry. Julia paraded it day and night. She had every chance to guard or swap it." Julia's voice cracked. "Why would I replace my own inheritance?" "Maybe because you knew it wasn't yours," I shot back. The room fell silent. Every eye shifted from her trembling hands to the glittering glass around her neck. For the first time, the golden child's crown slipped. The jewelers packed their cases, their verdict final. "If you want answers," one said, "you'll need more than experts. You'll need proof of where the originals went." I slipped my hand into my pocket, feeling the worn edges of the cassette tape. Grandpa's voice echoed in my mind. "Follow the music." The thought chilled me. Could it be? Was the jewelry ever meant to be Julia's at all? Everyone shouted, accusations flying across the room. My father threatened lawsuits. A cousin cried that the family was cursed. Julia sat frozen, her eyes wide, mouth open as if still trying to form words. But I said nothing. Not yet. Because deep down, I knew the answer wasn't in their noise. It was on that old cassette. I clutched it tighter, a strange calm settling over me. The tape wasn't worthless. It had always been the map. But what I didn't know was, the cassette told me where they were. The cassette hissed as I replayed the jazz track for the 100th time. The coded notes no longer sounded like music. They sounded like directions. Pauses lined up with coordinates. Sharp bursts with numbers. I scribbled furiously in a notebook until the pieces formed a crude map. The farmhouse cellar. Grandpa's farmhouse. The one everyone dismissed as old, drafty, worthless. At dawn, I drove out there. The gravel road crunched under my tires, the morning fog curling like ghosts over the fields. My hands trembled on the steering wheel. Part of me still wondered if I'd lost it, chasing ghosts in static and jazz. But something stronger pushed me forward. The cellar smelled of mildew and dust. Cobwebs hung like curtains across the low beams. I swept my flashlight along the stone walls. At first nothing, just damp cement and forgotten shelves. Then I noticed it. One wall's bricks were newer, their color slightly brighter. I pressed my palm against it. Hollow. Heart pounding, I grabbed a rusted crowbar from the corner and wedged it between the bricks. The sound of stone scraping stone echoed like thunder in the silence. With each pull, my arms shook, but brick by brick the wall gave way. Behind it, steel. A safe, old but intact, its dial gleaming faintly under my flashlight. The cassette key. My fingers shook as I slid it into the lock. For a moment, resistance, then a click. The heavy door creaked open. Inside was velvet. Deep red, pristine, untouched by time. My breath caught as I pulled it back. The real jewelry. Every piece glittered like fire under the beam. The necklace, the rings, and the bracelets were worth every penny of the 18 million Julia had flaunted. But this wasn't all. Beneath the trays of jewels lay a thick envelope stuffed with legal documents. I opened it and froze. Bank statements, offshore accounts, property deeds in Switzerland, Colorado, and New York. Values scrawled in the margins. Tens of millions, maybe more. Grandpa's fortune hadn't been diminished. It had been hidden. Tears stung my eyes. For once, I wasn't the failure. I wasn't the outcast. He had trusted me. My fingers brushed the back of the safe, where a small metal case sat taped to the wall. I pulled it free. It was heavier than it looked. I opened it and nearly dropped it. A video cassette. Marked in Grandpa's handwriting, "Play when you are ready." My pulse quickened. Jewelry, documents, these were assets. But a video? That was a voice from beyond. A truth he wanted me to see. Something no one else could deny. I stared at the label, my hands clammy. Part of me feared what he might say. Was it instructions? A warning? Or another secret waiting to shatter everything again? I slipped the jewelry and papers into my bag, but I held the cassette like it were made of glass. The farmhouse felt smaller now, the walls closing in. This wasn't just about inheritance anymore. This was about legacy, about the truth of who my grandfather really was and what he had left for me. As I climbed out of the cellar into the dim morning light, one thought hammered in my skull. The family had no idea what was coming. But what I didn't know was, my grandfather left a video too. The metal case rattled in my hands as I carried it out of the farmhouse cellar. I had expected jewelry, maybe papers. I hadn't expected this. A USB drive, small and unremarkable, but with my grandfather's familiar scrawl across a strip of tape, "Play when you are ready." My palms sweated as I slid it into my laptop that night. The screen flickered, then steadied. And there he was, Grandpa. His face was thinner, cheeks hollowed by illness, but his eyes, those were the same. Sharp, watchful, full of secrets he'd always carried like armor. "Daniel," he said, his voice low but steady, like he was speaking across time itself. "If you're hearing this, then it means the will has been read. And it means the trap has been sprung." My heart hammered. He leaned closer to the camera. Julia was never meant to inherit the jewelry. She was a decoy. I knew your father, your siblings, they'd circle her like vultures. I needed them distracted. The jewels I placed in her care were worthless glass. The real wealth, the true assets I placed in your hands. I froze. He knew. He planned this. Daniel, he continued, his voice softening, you were never a failure. You were never the embarrassment. You were the one who listened, the one who cared. That's why I made you trustee. Not because I wanted you to be rich, but because I wanted you to protect what truly matters. This fortune isn't just money. It's leverage. It can destroy, or it can build. And you, son, are the only one I trust not to let it rot. Tears blurred my vision. The words I had longed to hear my entire life, validation, trust, belief, they were here, carved into pixels, etched forever. He coughed, his body racking with age and weakness. If your family challenges you, let them. The law, the documents, the proof, they all belong to you. But remember this, power corrupts. Don't become the man your father became. Be better. He paused, his eyes flicking sideways as if he knew his time was running out. Then he leaned forward one final time. I hid everything you'll need. The ledger, the deeds, the accounts, they're yours to secure. But Daniel, listen closely. They won't stop coming. Envy never dies quietly. The fight isn't over just because you found the truth. In fact, he coughed again, voice rasping. It's only beginning. The video ended with static, the screen dissolving into black. I sat there in the silence of my apartment, the weight of his words pressing down like chains and wings at the same time. I wasn't the failure. I wasn't the forgotten one. I was the trustee. For the first time in my life, I had proof, not just on paper, not just in whispers, but in his own voice. But alongside the relief came a tremor of dread. Because he was right. Julia wasn't going to walk away quietly. My father wasn't going to surrender his pride. And Ellis, the lawyer who had already chosen sides, wasn't going to let millions slip through his fingers. The video was a shield, but it was also a target. But what I didn't know was, the fight wasn't over yet. The courthouse smelled of varnished wood and dust, the kind of scent that sticks in your throat. My hands tightened on the briefcase in my lap. Inside were the weapons Grandpa had left me, the jewelry, the ledger, the cassette. Proof of truth in a family that had spent years perfecting lies. Julia strutted into the courtroom in a designer dress, chin high, confidence radiating like perfume. Ellis walked at her side, crisp in his suit, whispering strategy. My father followed, the same smirk he'd worn at every dinner where I was the punchline. The bailiff called for silence. The judge, stern and gray-eyed, settled into his chair. Case of Cole versus Cole. Allegations of fraudulent inheritance. Present your case. I rose, heart hammering but voice steady. Your Honor, the will my family clings to is a forgery of intention. My grandfather left behind more than words. He left proof. And today, I intend to show it. I laid the jewelry case on the table, flipping it open. Gasps rippled. The jewels glittered under the lights, but the experts had already declared them fakes. What Julia parades around is glass. The real set, I pulled out the velvet pouch from my bag, was hidden, and here it is. The judge leaned forward. Julia's face drained of color. I placed the ledger on the desk. These are my grandfather's accounts. 25 million in offshore holdings. The trail leads directly to me, his appointed trustee. Ellis leapt up. Objection. This is circumstantial. The judge cut him off. Sit down, Mr. Ellis, we'll hear him out. I clicked the old cassette player. Static filled the room. Then Grandpa's voice, frail but commanding. Daniel is the one I trust. The others cannot be trusted. Protect what matters. The room went silent. The words echoed like thunder. I turned toward Julia. Her lip trembled, mascara smudging under the heat of the moment. She glanced at Ellis, who refused to meet her eyes. The weight of exposure pressed her shoulders down. The judge's gavel struck. Fraudulent concealment. Misrepresentation of assets. This court rules in favor of Daniel Cole as trustee and rightful heir to the estate. Julia Cole is stripped of the claim. Attorney Ellis will be investigated for malpractice and potential conspiracy. The verdict hit like a tidal wave. My father slumped in his seat, pale and defeated. Julia collapsed into her chair, sobbing into her hands. Ellis went rigid, his career cracking apart in real time. The courtroom murmured with the sound of lives unraveling. For once, the whispers weren't about me being the family embarrassment. They were about justice, about truth dragged into the light. I stood taller, not because of the fortune, but because Grandpa's trust had been honored. For the first time, my voice had carried weight in the room where it mattered most. But as the judge's gavel echoed one final time, the reality settled on me like a shadow. Winning the case was one thing. But what I did next, with the fortune, with my family, with the fractured pieces of who I was, that choice hadn't been made yet. But what I didn't know was, I still had a choice to make. When the verdict was sealed and the courtroom emptied, I stood outside on the courthouse steps with the weight of nearly $30 million on my shoulders. People stared, some with envy, some with awe, but I felt neither rich nor powerful. I felt responsible. The estate was mine now. Every property, every account, every hidden corner my grandfather had built. For days, I sat at his old farmhouse desk, ledger spread open, tape recorder beside me, trying to decide who I would become with this inheritance. I could have hoarded it. I could have flaunted it like Julia with her glass jewels. But every time I tried to picture that life, I saw Grandpa's tired eyes in that video, warning me not to let power corrupt me. So I began with the land. The farmhouse was falling apart, its paint peeling, porch sagging. I hired workers to restore it to the place Grandpa loved, keeping the creaks in the floorboards but strengthening the bones of the house. I planted rows of apple trees in the orchard, the way he once dreamed. For the community, I funded scholarships at the local high school in his name, quietly, without my signature on every plaque. He'd told me once that real giving didn't need applause. The jewelry. I had it appraised, locked away the real pieces, then sold part of the collection. Millions went into causes Grandpa supported. Veterans' homes, small-town libraries, and cancer research. Writing those checks felt better than flashing a Rolex ever could. Maddie, my cousin, came back around. She'd betrayed me once, yes, but she also admitted her mistakes, stood by me when the court battle got ugly. Forgiveness wasn't easy, but we found middle ground. Family, after all, is flawed, but sometimes worth saving. Julia, though, I cut ties. She had mocked me, betrayed me, and schemed against me until the very end. When she showed up at the farmhouse gate one afternoon, asking for another chance, I didn't raise my voice. I simply closed the door. Some bridges burn clean, and it's best to leave the ashes behind. One evening, after the farm had been restored, I sat alone in the study. The cassette, worn, cracked, the thing everyone laughed at, sat in my hands again. I pressed play, the hiss filling the room, followed by Grandpa's voice. "Daniel," he said, calm, eternal. "If you've come this far, you've learned what I always hoped you would. Worth is not measured in millions, Daniel. It's measured in truth." I closed my eyes, letting his words settle into the bones of the house, into the orchard outside, into my chest where years of shame had once lived. For the first time in my life, I felt free, not rich, not powerful, just free. And I realized something then. The real inheritance wasn't the jewelry, the land, or even the ledger. It was the dignity of finally knowing who I was and what I stood for. I rewound the tape, set it gently back on the shelf, and whispered into the empty room. "I won't forget, Grandpa. Not ever." But what I didn't know was, the real treasure wasn't wealth, it was worth.